So today we'll be web scraping in .NET C#. I'll go over what it is, what the use cases are, how I use it. I'll have to get a disclaimer out of the way. I'll tell you what are easy websites to web scrape, and then how to protect your own website from it. I'll touch on, is C# the best language for it? And after all of that, I will show you an implementation with the package AngleSharp. So it's basically automatically visiting a website with the purpose of programmatically extracting information from it. It's often a script utilizing a headless browser. A headless browser is a browser without a user interface. We'll talk about the limitations in a bit. Other names for web scrapers would be spiders, crawlers, bots, scripts, and many more. There's probably some distinction between those, but yeah. I use web scraping when there's no public API available, no other public datasets, or when I have to collect very specific data from multiple sources. But it's more like a last resort for me. I would always first check if there's public APIs available. For example, I'd rather implement Google APIs than having to web scrape Google Maps. Let's get the disclaimer out of the way. This video is meant for educational purposes. If you were to attempt web scraping, make sure to check your federal laws about web scraping. My understanding of it is you may only scrape public, non-personal information, and the obtained data is not to be used for commercial purposes, aka don't sell the info. Also, make sure to check the copyrights of the target website. Some websites specifically disallow web scraping their website without written consent. So with that out of the way, I opened two Pokemon related websites. This website consists of a long list with all the Pokemon and has a rather easy layout, not too much dynamical loading going on here, so it's a pretty static website. Let's check the source, and we see all the data is there. There's no delays, no dynamical loading. So that looks like a very good target for web scraping. Of course, there's probably Pokemon APIs, public APIs to use, but that's not the point of the video. This is just an example. Let's check out the second website. It's also all of the Pokemon, but you see a load more Pokemon button, which likely uses JavaScript or something else, some dynamic language to load more Pokemon. But this website requires a user interference, so to speak, to load more Pokemon. So that's gonna be pretty hard to do with just an automatic script without me in the picture. So this would be an example of a highly dynamic website, which is pretty hard, near impossible to scrape all of the Pokemon easily. Have some detail pages. Maybe if we were to have a list of names and just scrape all the detail pages, that might be possible. So I'll be web scraping in C#. And for that we need the AngleSharp .NET library, which will make a lot of things easier for us. A very simple script would be to configure AngleSharp to browse the URL of the target website, to open it, kind of download the HTML on the website, and then target specific HTML tags on that page, and then extract the text values or HTML values. Is C# the best language to do web scraping with? Probably not, but it's our favorite language. You might have an easier time with the more dynamic languages like JavaScript or Python, where the tiniest null exception will probably not crash your entire script or even the entire worker service. On the other hand, you might experience more null values where you expect values, so nulls without noticing you are not getting the data. So let's head over to the code. I am using AngleSharp in a .NET background worker service that is meant to run with a time interval like every 1 hour or 24 hours. Yeah, I can choose that. To learn more about the background web scraper, the background worker service, check out a previous video where I go into detail about those. And I'll likely leave the source code as a freebie on my Patreon. So I added AngleSharp, the NuGet package, to my background worker service. Let's then head over to the program CS. And I configure AngleSharp just with the default configuration, add it as a singleton to my services. I am then using AngleSharp's browsing context in my general scrape service. So I inject the stuff and then have some methods. The first method will, for each scrape URL, download the HTML by opening it with that headless browser and extract all of the documents, so the HTML from those pages, and return the list of documents. These methods will be used in the actual scraper service, which would be the Pokemon scraper. So, running the worker will execute the scrape Pokemon method, which has access to the database. And then we have two URLs. The top one was the highly dynamic one, which we will struggle with if we were to scrape that one. We'll use the more static website as an example. So then I just call the scraper service scrape HTML from URLs, and then I should have the markup of that website. So that's the scraping part. So we access this website and we download the markup of that website, the HTML documents of that website. Then we have a list of documents where we can easily just use link to filter the list, just to do all kinds of list operations. So that's pretty easy. But once we have that, we'll want to extract the essential data from the HTML. So then we'll use a parser just to parse that the Pokemon list, and we'll do that by accessing specific documents on that page. So we'll likely target, let's go to the other screen, we'll likely target this table and then try to get every row. So we'll inspect this to see what the markup is like. And then this table will likely be, it even has an ID. This is going to be useful to target. And we'll probably use that in our parsing. So you need to know a little bit of HTML and CSS but not too much. You just need to know how to access a class or how to access a div, an ID, an element with certain ID or certain class or certain attributes. But the AngleSharp documentation, the AngleSharp Fluent API, so to speak, makes that fairly easy. And for the most part, you can use link to loop, for example, to target the first row or the last row, things like that. You don't need to know CSS first element or odd child or the end child. You don't really need to know that, but it's useful if you do. So I'm only interested in this page right now, so I'm going to pass that to our scrape function, and then the HTML variable will contain the markup of this page, which will be the first and only document in this HTML list. So I am going to pass that markup to our parser, and in the parser we can then target specific elements to extract the data from. And by the end, hopefully we get the essential data we need, and then we can store it in our database or whatever you want to do with it. So passing the document, then we get the specific elements from that document, which will be in our case that table and the rows. So let me construct the selectors for that. So we'll target table with ID Pokédex and then get all the rows. Why are all of these hidden? You might not want to, yeah. So let's not target the hidden ones, since that's probably not useful to us. Let's see, then we have an image, and in the other TD we'll have the name, and then that's all we're gonna scrape for now. So we'll target the table where the ID is Pokemon. This is the symbol to target an ID. A dot would be to target a class, and it's the table's ID, so we can't leave any spaces between it. And then a child element, we could leave a space and then the TR, or we could do like the direct child of the table element tag. But there's possibly a t-body or t-head in between, so we're just gonna leave it like that. And then a link where statement to filter out the elements that have a hidden class. So now we should have all the rows. Let's inspect such a row. So we have the first column with a cell fixed. Maybe we can use that. And then we'll try to extract this image. Let's just check out a second to get the name. Would be an A tag with the title, and the text content will be the name. You also have a link in here. You could actually save those links or follow those links to the detail page and then scrape more information from there. That's what I do for another use case. Yeah. So then we want to target that column, so we can use the query selector. That's not the query selector all that we used before, just for a single element. And then we do something similar. Then we say td, and then the class, let's say cell fixed. If we want to be more specific, we could even say cell num, cell fixed, dot cell num, dot cell fixed. But I think this will be enough. Then we can probably get attribute element by tag name. We could say image, and then get attribute or something. Let's check that for a second. Oh yeah, it says get elements for by tag name. Just interested in the first one. I could do first or default if you're not sure if it's there. And then get attribute source, I think it is. Then value or something. No, it should get me the image. Oops, it crashed. Seems to be Pokédex. Okay, seems like we missed something. There's a t-hat in here, which crashes our script at the moment. So let's try to target t-body. I'm not, yeah, it should be there. Yeah, t-body should be there. Let's target that. So table ID Pokédex, t-body, and we want all the TRs, so all the table rows. Okay, apparently I had this type filter on normal instead of all, so that should be more accurate. And we run it again, and we're correctly getting that image. So the bulbasaur.png is the first one, and then the name. Let's get the name, and then we're going to fill up this Pokemon entity. And then in the scraper service, we could then save that to the database. So you see, it already takes a lot of debugging to just get simple information out of a website. And this is a fairly static, a fairly easy website to do. You could have websites with pagination, with more dynamic things going on, with load times, with less structured HTML, with more like noise to go through. So it's pretty, yeah, it's not as easy as calling an API. So just imagine we finished our script, we got all the data, and we spend many days, weeks, even months or years on perfecting this web scraping script by being as defensive as possible, so trying to catch all the exceptions, all the null values and all that. And then the author of the website decides to update his or her website, then you can partly start over. And that's more or less the life of a web scraper. It's high maintenance, and it's not that easy. So that's why I wouldn't resort to it as a first choice. Especially if you then scrape from multiple sources, you're gonna risk having that problem with all of the sources. They can all update every now and then, and yeah. So I extract the name as well. Note this can all be nullable, so I added an extra if statement to just continue. If the name is null, we might not want to get that data. And then the image URL can also be null, which our entity might not like. So let's do it like that, and let's test it out. So the first Pokemon would be Bulbasaur and the image of Bulbasaur. The next one, Ivysaur, Ivysaur's evolution. Then it should be Venusaur, if I remember correctly. Yeah, and so on. About a lot of Pokemon. You might want to do some duplication checks later on. Maybe if you want to run this script every day or something. Just checking for new Pokemon, for example. So once back at the Pokemon Scraper, we're getting the parsed Pokemon back from the parse list. You could do whatever you want or need to do with those objects before adding that to your database. If you don't need to do anything, feel free to one-line this code. Also, the scrape service, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but yeah, using the task when all with a value task or just with the task when all seem to silently fail or just return empty results every now and then. It was pretty inconsistent, that's why I left it like that for the demo. So that was all for my web scraping demo using AngleSharp and .NET C# running in a background worker service. I added some extra code for more advanced scenarios. For example, you could have paginated data for, let's say this list only showed 16 results and then had page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up until the last one. Then you'd likely first want to target the paginator element, extract all the URLs and the amount of page numbers from that, so you can then scrape from each page individually. So that's some code I added. Feel free to adapt that to your use case. This is just some example code where I then calculate the total pages, then make a list of all the page URLs to then, so that would be page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we'd likely want to do that. So loop over those lists to to get all the HTML separately. And we can just use the same parser since it's about the same content, the same website, the same data structures markup. And then another possibility would be maybe you also want to scrape these detail pages. Then you might want to save, so extract these links, these URLs to then scrape those individually. You'll likely need another parser since that page will have a different structure and you'll want to target different data. So feel free to play around with that. So lastly, what can you do to protect your website from web scrapers? There is no method that I know that will block 100% of web scraping attempts. But you could undertake a few things, such as the first thing would be you can add a statement explicitly disallowing web scraping in your copyright statement. Explicitly saying you don't give consent for web scraping the data. Like this website did in here, it's in Dutch, but they basically did that. And then another thing, like I mentioned before, you can make your website highly dynamic with dynamic loaders, all kinds of animation or loading elements that will likely discourage people from even trying to web scrape your website. So that's what you could do. So I hope you liked the video, got some value from it. If you did, please like the video. I hope there was enough information to get you started to work on your ideas, your projects using AngleSharp and C#.net. The channel is on its way to a 100 videos, so if you're interested in future videos, please do subscribe as well. The code base from the video will likely be available on my Patreon, so I'll leave a link to that in the description. See you in the next video.